something incredibly enormous moved silently beneath the beautiful blue surface of this deeply ancient, perfectly untouched prehistoric ocean. Few ancient marine creatures ever actually saw this magnificently terrifying, deeply powerful prehistoric shadow rapidly coming toward them. It successfully ruled a beautifully warm, deeply shallow ancient ocean, completely unlike our modern cold marine environments today. To completely innocent smaller animals, the beautiful ancient sea itself instantly became an incredibly dangerous, deeply terrifying trap. Long before beautiful modern whales existed, this spectacularly massive creature perfectly dominated ancient global marine ecosystems completely unchallenged. Another incredibly powerful, deeply magnificent biological king absolutely dominated the vast prehistoric ocean with completely unmatched physical supremacy. Absolutely everything swimming around its vast underwater kingdom instantly intimately knew its deeply terrifying, heavily dominant, majestic presence. It represented an incredibly ruthless, beautifully specialized ancient marine predator, brilliantly adapted for complete aquatic ecosystem dominance forever. It was genuinely a spectacularly massive, deeply elongated primitive whale, completely masking its remarkable terrestrial, ancient mammalian ancestry. And it brilliantly represented something entirely incredibly new within the deeply chaotic, constantly shifting prehistoric biological evolutionary timeline. This beautifully terrifying, deeply mysterious giant beast ultimately became the undisputed, completely absolute first magnificent prehistoric whale king. For millions of perfectly continuous prehistoric years, it absolutely successfully ruled these incredibly vast, deeply rich ancient waters. But even the absolutely greatest biological kings eventually tragically fall when completely unstoppable global environmental transitions unexpectedly begin. Its beautifully warm, incredibly stable, shallow prehistoric world was unfortunately permanently changing into something completely fundamentally unrecognizable forever. And this spectacularly magnificent, deeply fascinating ancient whale king would tragically completely vanish into absolute evolutionary marine silence. During the spectacular late Eocene epoch, the ancient world was significantly warmer and absolutely perfectly suited for life. These beautifully warm, incredibly shallow ancient epicontinental seas completely teemed with a profoundly spectacular diversity of marine life. Vibrant coral reefs flourished beautifully beneath these warm, tropical, prehistoric waters, creating completely perfect habitats for diverse species. Ancient coastlines look completely different, beautifully bordered by massive mangrove forests, reaching perfectly into the warm, shallow ocean. Nourishing food resources remained absolutely abundant, wonderfully supporting incredibly massive schools of primitive, prehistoric fish swimming continuously together. Entire marine ecosystems spectacularly flourished throughout the vast Tethys Sea, beautifully creating one profoundly interconnected ancient aquatic environment. Golden sunlight successfully penetrated deep into these clear coastal waters, brilliantly sustaining absolutely incredibly rich underwater marine ecosystems. Fascinating ancient creatures smoothly shared this shallow prehistoric ocean, alongside primitive sirenians and heavily armored giant sea turtles. And silently swimming gracefully among them was the deeply magnificent, incredibly powerful future king of the early whales. These expansive, beautifully warm ancient seas successfully connected vast continents across our dramatically shifting, Prehistoric global terrestrial landscape. Prehistoric marine life moved constantly, brilliantly utilizing these highly productive coastal environments for essential daily protection and nourishment. This beautifully undisturbed, completely spectacular early marine environment successfully concealed many profound prehistoric evolutionary secrets deep underwater forever. Both massive marine predators and absolutely abundant tiny prey species successfully shared these perfectly balanced warm ancient waters. Far below the golden surface, sunlight gracefully lay another deeply mysterious, completely fascinating ancient biological aquatic marine world. It perfectly represented a beautifully complex, incredibly rich marine ecosystem, completely unlike absolutely anything surviving alive today anywhere. One spectacularly massive, completely serpentine early marine mammal had finally successfully evolved absolutely perfectly for this specific environment. This incredibly vibrant, beautifully warm ancient Eocene ocean eventually successfully created its absolute greatest, deeply terrifying aquatic king. And for millions of completely continuous prehistoric years, this spectacularly beautiful, incredibly rich marine kingdom endured entirely unchallenged. The magnificent evolutionary story of the spectacular first whale king actually began completely upon dry, ancient terrestrial land. Millions of continuous prehistoric years ago, small primitive four-legged mammals beautifully lived completely normal daily terrestrial lives. However, seeking absolutely abundant new daily food resources, these incredibly brave early ancestors gradually entered shallow coastal waters. Over countless consecutive generations, their perfectly adaptable biological bodies slowly underwent deeply profound, completely necessary aquatic physical transformations. Their ancient terrestrial legs became incredibly short, while their increasingly elongated flexible spines flawlessly mastered powerful underwater propulsion. Simultaneously, their external breathing nostrils beautifully drifted backward, perfectly allowing highly efficient, deeply seamless, continuous surface ocean respiration. Eventually, their shrinking pelvic bones completely detached from the spinal column, permanently ending all possible land-walking capabilities. Yet despite achieving absolute marine mastery, Basilosaurus miraculously retained incredibly tiny, completely functional vestigial, terrestrial mammalian hind legs. This spectacularly profound evolutionary journey beautifully produced something absolutely magnificent, perfectly designed for complete global ancient marine domination. By completely abandoning the land, this deeply fascinating prehistoric creature ultimately unlocked absolutely limitless aquatic biological predatory potential. The remarkably bizarre, fully aquatic Basilosaurus wonderfully represented the absolute pinnacle of early ancient terrestrial mammalian ocean adaptation. The spectacular first whale king had flawlessly arrived, perfectly prepared to successfully dominate these beautifully warm Eocene seas. When early 19th century scientists initially discovered these enormous ancient fossilized bones, they were completely, absolutely, profoundly confused. Observing its profoundly serpentine vertebral column, brilliant early naturalists mistakenly classified this magnificent marine beast as giant reptiles. Consequently, they proudly originally named this spectacular ancient animal Basilosaurus, which literally translates into the terrifying king lizard. However, subsequent detailed anatomical analysis completely confirmed that this spectacularly massive prehistoric creature was absolutely no marine reptile. Instead, it beautifully represented an incredibly successful, completely fully adapted early marine mammal belonging within cetacean evolutionary lineages. Measuring straight up towards 60 feet long, this beautifully terrifying ancient animal became our absolute first giant whale. Its spectacularly massive, undeniably dominant physical presence instantly transformed absolutely every single ancient marine ecosystem it actively inhabited. Lacking modern echolocation abilities, it brilliantly utilized highly specialized directional underwater hearing towards successfully dominating ancient Tethyan seas. It beautifully stood completely apart from both ancient terrestrial reptiles and completely deeply familiar modern baleen ocean whales. This magnificently unique, perfectly adapted prehistoric marine survivor effectively became the absolute undisputed first truly magnificent whale king. To completely understand this magnificently powerful ancient oceanic king, we must deeply examine its incredibly specialized marine anatomy. Stretching incredibly beyond 60 feet long, this profoundly massive ancient creature seamlessly navigated open waters with absolute perfection. Instead of using rapid tail beats, it swam gracefully through elegant, continuous vertical undulations along its massive spine. Incredibly thick, remarkably dense rib bones brilliantly provided essential internal ballast, completely preventing unwanted rolling during active swimming. Its specialized front flippers retained highly flexible elbow joints, flawlessly allowing completely unmatched steering capabilities within coastal shallows. Fascinatingly, it still possessed incredibly tiny, completely functional rear legs, entirely disconnected from its incredibly massive spinal column. These vestigial terrestrial remnants offered absolutely zero swimming propulsion, most likely serving strictly as crucial physical mating guides. Its enormous, beautifully streamlined skull wonderfully housed deeply powerful jaw muscles capable of producing absolutely devastating crushing forces. Generating over 3,600 pounds of pure bite pressure, this spectacular king crushed thick bone completely effortlessly. Unlike modern whales, it uniquely retained incredibly sharp conical front incisors, brilliantly designed for grasping extremely slippery prey. Heavy triangular rear molars feature jagged serrated edges, completely perfectly allowing this magnificent predator to systematically slice flesh. It brilliantly perceived directional underwater sounds by utilizing highly specialized fatty acoustic pads beautifully embedded within its jawbones. Dense middle ear bones remain partially isolated by air sinuses, flawlessly enhancing its crucial low-frequency marine hearing. Because it completely lacked any sophisticated biological echolocation abilities, this relentless hunter relied heavily upon superb underwater vision. Its unparalleled physical dimensions absolutely guaranteed undisputed dominance across these vibrant, beautifully crowded, ancient tropical aquatic marine ecosystems. A remarkably small horizontal tail fluke beautifully assisted its vertical underwater movements, perfectly finalizing its spectacular marine adaptation. While absolutely incapable of deep oceanic diving, its spectacular serpentine grace effectively provided completely unmatched shallow water efficiency. Combining raw physical power with profound evolutionary anatomical shifts, beautifully forged the absolute ultimate prehistoric aquatic ocean king. Every brilliant prehistoric morning systematically commenced with this magnificent giant actively patrolling its vast, beautifully warm kingdom. Moving effortlessly through incredibly shallow tropical waters, it beautifully surveyed, completely crowded ancient marine coastal biological communities. Enormous schools of primitive fishes scattered uncontrollably whenever this spectacular, incredibly powerful dark shadow gracefully approached them. Because it completely lacked echolocation, this apex predator relied heavily upon incredibly sharp, highly adapted underwater vision. It brilliantly utilized highly specialized directional hearing, successfully channeling distant underwater vibrations directly through fatty jaw pads. This magnificent sensory combination perfectly allowed the giant to gracefully track highly elusive, completely unaware marine targets. Frequently, it actively hunted extremely large, heavily armored prehistoric bony fishes beautifully swimming across shallow ocean floors. Using its spectacularly powerful jaws, it completely effortlessly crushed tough external shells, instantly securing highly nutritious meals. However, absolutely nothing satisfied this incredibly massive aquatic king, quite like actively hunting other early marine mammals. During the late Eocene epoch, vast coastal lagoons beautifully served as essential calving grounds for smaller whales. The significantly smaller, highly agile Dorudon frequently brought their highly vulnerable newborn calves into these shallow waters. Adult Dorudons swam incredibly fast, making them profoundly difficult targets for the much larger, slightly slower Basilosaurus. Therefore, this beautifully ruthless king specifically targeted significantly slower, deeply inexperienced juvenile Dorudons during completely devastating ambushes. Silently approaching from below, the magnificent giant rapidly accelerated, beautifully demonstrating absolutely perfectly synchronized vertical spinal undulations. Fossilized bite marks brilliantly reveal exactly how this terrifying predator systematically delivered completely fatal, incredibly precise strikes. It aggressively targeted the vulnerable skull, successfully utilizing immense biting pressure to completely instantly paralyze young whales. Its incredibly sharp anterior teeth beautifully grasped struggling victims, while jagged rear molars successfully sliced tough flesh. This remarkably violent, highly specialized feeding strategy effectively maintained its completely absolute dominance across these ancient ecosystems. Even significantly large, deeply terrifying ancient lamniform sharks naturally yielded completely whenever this spectacularly massive whale approached. Though sharks competed for similar nutritional resources, none could successfully challenge this incredibly powerful, entirely massive leviathan. Peaceful primitive sea cows cautiously retreated into completely dense mangrove forests whenever the undisputed king swam nearby. Heavy ancient sea turtles gracefully paddled away quickly, desperately avoiding any completely unnecessary, highly dangerous physical encounters. It lived a beautifully solitary, incredibly relentless daily existence, focused entirely upon maintaining constant essential nutritional intake. Spanning across vast global prehistoric oceans, these magnificent ancient leviathans successfully established one completely interconnected, unchallenged dynasty. They were the absolute first massive, fully aquatic, air-breathing carnivores to completely dominate post-dinosaur oceans. Every single biological interaction perfectly demonstrated exactly why this remarkably adaptable creature commanded absolutely profound oceanic respect. As another beautiful Eocene day gracefully ended, the magnificent king continued patrolling its wonderfully vast aquatic territory. Gliding silently beneath glowing twilight waters, The spectacular first whale beautifully embodied, completely unmatched prehistoric marine supremacy. Even the absolute most powerful biological kings inevitably completely depend upon their beautifully balanced, deeply fragile ancient worlds. Around 34 million years ago, its beautifully warm tropical aquatic ecosystem systematically began transforming completely, irrevocably, forever. Massive dramatic tectonic shifts gradually triggered intense global cooling, permanently disrupting wonderfully reliable ancient oceanic surface water temperatures. Freezing Antarctic ice sheets rapidly expanded, tragically causing those beautifully shallow, wonderfully rich epicontinental seas to completely recede. This spectacularly massive ancient predator desperately required these extremely specific, shallow coastal environments for successful daily biological hunting. Rapidly falling global sea levels completely devastated abundant coastal nutrient resources, dangerously eliminating previously reliable primary prey populations. Without its preferred shallow hunting grounds, this deeply specialized giant completely lacks sufficient evolutionary flexibility toward deeper waters. Its incredibly long, beautifully serpentine skeletal body perfectly prevented essential deep oceanic diving during these profoundly changing times. Simultaneously, totally unprecedented freezing marine currents violently swept completely across previously calm, beautifully tranquil, prehistoric Tethyan global seaways. The spectacularly magnificent biological adaptations previously securing total absolute marine dominance unexpectedly became incredibly fatal, evolutionary physical liabilities. Wandering slowly through an increasingly unfamiliar colder ocean, the magnificent first whale king tragically faced completely overwhelming starvation. Absolutely everything this spectacularly massive prehistoric ruler deeply depended upon was now completely violently disappearing beneath dark waves. As drastically cooling global ocean temperatures fundamentally transformed marine ecosystems, completely new cetacean competitors rapidly successfully emerged everywhere. These beautifully agile, highly adaptable emerging crown whales represented the spectacular biological beginning of our modern oceanic lineages. Unlike the massive serpentine Basilosaurus, these incredibly swift new marine mammals possessed remarkably advanced, highly efficient biological anatomies. Some highly specialized evolutionary descendants successfully developed profound echolocation abilities, perfectly mastering increasingly dark, deeply cooling marine waters. Brilliant echolocation completely eliminated traditional hunting limitations, allowing these sophisticated toothed predators to effortlessly conquer deeper oceanic territories. Meanwhile, other magnificent emerging cetacean groups beautifully evolved specialized baleen filters, perfectly exploiting massive new marine plankton blooms. Surrounded by incredibly productive new biological competitors, the magnificent first whale king tragically found itself completely totally outmatched. Fierce oceanic upwelling systems violently replaced calm coastal environments, systematically devastating those previously reliable shallow prehistoric hunting domains. While smaller whales flawlessly adapted toward thriving within these beautifully turbulent, highly energetic, newly formed cold aquatic ecosystems, the spectacularly massive, structurally rigid Basilosaurus simply could not successfully compete against absolutely incredibly agile modern mammalian ancestors. Its magnificently terrifying ancient reign slowly faded as increasingly sophisticated marine descendants relentlessly conquered every single global ocean. Absolutely nowhere remained completely safe or reliable for this deeply specialized, profoundly massive shallow water, Eocene prehistoric predator. Relentless biological evolutionary progress aggressively pushed continuously forward, tragically abandoning the beautiful first whale king completely behind forever. Starving and utterly exhausted, these spectacular giants silently drifted through beautifully indifferent, dramatically shifting ancient cold oceanic environments. Their previously legendary terrifying dominance was systematically eclipsed by incredibly brilliant, perfectly engineered new biological advanced oceanic masterpieces. Evolution absolutely demands continuous biological adaptation, punishing any magnificent ancient creature tragically unable to successfully, completely, permanently change. The fiercely majestic Basilosaurus surrendered its undisputed oceanic throne to far more beautifully advanced, incredibly versatile modern whales. Ultimately, the absolute final Eocene sunset tragically marked the permanent biological evolutionary conclusion for this spectacularly massive leviathan. Approximately 34 million years ago, the wonderfully beautiful Eocene epoch permanently concluded alongside its magnificent marine ruler. The once beautifully vibrant, incredibly crowded, shallow, epicontinental ancient seas slowly became profoundly empty, totally barren marine environments. This spectacularly massive, deeply specialized apex predator tragically found absolute survival completely impossible within increasingly freezing marine waters. Falling global sea levels aggressively destroyed completely vital coastal nurseries, permanently removing essential vulnerable juvenile Darudan prey populations. Violent ocean currents relentlessly swept across the shifting globe, systematically replacing beautifully tranquil, prehistoric Tethyan marine hunting grounds. Millions of perfectly continuous evolutionary years tragically could not successfully save this magnificently powerful ancient aquatic giant forever. Vast ancient territories that previously provided absolutely abundant biological nourishment sadly transformed into profoundly barren cold oceanic deserts. Its incredibly elongated, beautifully inflexible serpentine anatomy completely prevented any desperately required survival within deeper, cold oceanic environments. The spectacularly warm Eocene greenhouse climate irreversibly collapsed, completely plunging our entire beautiful planet into freezing icehouse conditions. Drifting completely alone across these violently shifting waters, the deeply exhausted king found absolutely nothing familiar remaining anywhere. Looking quietly into an increasingly silent sea, the magnificently powerful ancient apex predator tragically accepted its inevitable conclusion. Absolutely nothing successfully halts immense geological planetary transformations, slowly effectively crushing even the greatest prehistoric biological evolutionary masterpieces. Taking one beautifully silent, completely final exhausted breath, this spectacularly massive ancient creature quietly accepted its evolutionary fate. The previously thunderous, highly active ancient marine environment suddenly became profoundly, beautifully, completely, peacefully quiet without the Basilosaurus. Sinking deeply into cold oceanic shadows, the majestic first whale king permanently relinquished its completely undisputed global crown. That magnificently, beautifully terrifying prehistoric silhouette slowly disappeared completely into deep, dark, ancient, global, aquatic, environmental marine shadows. Relentless evolutionary progress aggressively pushed continuously forward, tragically leaving the perfectly adapted ancient Eocene masterpiece entirely completely behind. Without leaving any direct biological descendants, this spectacularly massive prehistoric genus tragically suffered complete, permanent, total evolutionary extinction. The beautifully vast, deeply familiar ancient marine territories were completely peacefully reclaimed by entirely natural shifting ecological forces. A profoundly new dawn broke peacefully over utterly empty waters, beautifully signaling an absolutely silent biological evolutionary transition. This spectacularly massive, incredibly powerful ancient cetacean tragically could not successfully change alongside its completely fundamentally shifting world. Standing absolutely beautifully empty beneath fading twilight, the deeply relentless prehistoric seascape finally completely defeated the ultimate king. Incredibly brilliant, perfectly adapted, highly sophisticated modern mammalian descendants would soon brilliantly rise across these profoundly cold oceans. Yet absolutely no subsequent marine biological species would ever successfully replicate this magnificent serpentine predator's sheer absolute majesty. The incredibly massive, deeply powerful, familiar, prehistoric silhouette slowly disappeared completely into freezing dark, ancient, global environmental shadows, stretching endlessly beneath an emotionally beautiful, profoundly darkening ancient sea. The magnificent age of Basilosaurus completely permanently concluded. Beautiful new biological marine rulers peacefully inherited our vastly dynamic, incredibly complex, constantly evolving global cold oceanic environments. But the spectacularly magnificent, deeply tragic first whale can completely vanish from existence, absolutely, entirely, peacefully, beautifully forever. Millions of consecutive years beautifully passed, successfully transforming these deeply ancient, incredibly warm oceans completely into dry sand. Yet spectacularly profound, deeply fascinating prehistoric biological traces miraculously survived, beautifully hidden completely perfectly beneath solid ancient stone. Dedicated modern scientists incredibly patiently excavate these beautifully preserved skeletal remains, profoundly seeking completely new biological evolutionary answers. Resting magnificently inside quiet natural museums, this spectacularly massive, deeply powerful skeleton continuously brilliantly inspires absolute human wonder. Spanning over 60 incredible feet, these spectacularly massive fossilized bones perfectly showcase an absolutely unrivaled prehistoric marine supremacy. Through brilliant modern scientific visualization, this magnificently unique prehistoric biological marine world beautifully returns toward vibrant life today. Once tragically misunderstood as terrifying giant sea serpents, these profoundly magnificent fossils actually represent our first true whales. Although its deeply unforgiving ancient Eocene environment disappeared completely forever, its spectacularly fascinating evolutionary cetacean legacy powerfully continues. Every single living biological whale, beautifully navigating our modern oceans, successfully carries this profoundly ancient, completely magnificent heritage. We must permanently remember Basilosaurus absolutely not as some terrifying monster, but rather representing one flawlessly adaptable king. It beautifully represented a spectacularly massive, profoundly relentless ancient survivor, completely dominating one deeply rich, perfectly balanced landscape. Its beautifully tragic fossilized legacy permanently reminds us that incredibly profound environmental ocean changes ultimately conquer absolutely everything. Swimming endlessly through our collective human imagination, the spectacular first whale king peacefully maintains completely absolute prehistoric immortality.